The rifle shot echoed through the canyon, sending a flock of startled crows into the azure Colorado sky as Thaddeus Tucker holstered his smoking Colt. Blood pooled beneath the rattlesnake that had nearly struck his horse, but his mind wasn't on the dead serpent. His eyes narrowed at the dust cloud rising from the direction of the Blackrock Mine, where rumors of human misery had drawn him to this remote corner of the territory in 1876. "Come on, Duster," he murmured, patting his palomino's neck. "Let's see what kind of devil's work is happening over there." Thaddeus had ridden with the Union Army during the war, then spent years drifting through Montana and Wyoming before finding himself in Colorado. At 32, the lines around his eyes spoke of hard living and harder choices, but beneath his weathered exterior beat a heart that couldn't abide injustice. The tales of women being sold to the mine had reached him in Riverside, a small settlement nestled along the Arkansas River where he'd stopped for supplies. The Blackrock Mine loomed ahead, a scar gouged into the mountainside. Men with dirt-streaked faces trudged in and out of the mine's entrance, their shoulders bent beneath invisible weights. Thaddeus dismounted at a distance, tethering Duster to a stunted pine, before crawling to a ridge overlooking the operation. Through his field glasses, he spotted the women immediately. 5 of them, dressed in tattered clothing, hauled water and supplies under the watchful eyes of armed guards. Even from this distance, he could see the exhaustion in their movements, the defeat in their postures. His jaw tightened as one guard shoved a young woman who'd stumbled, sending her sprawling into the dust. "That's enough of that," Thaddeus muttered, sliding back down the ridge to return to his horse. He needed information, and there was only one place to get it. The Rusty Nail was the kind of saloon that existed in every mining town dimly lit, stinking of unwashed bodies and cheap whiskey, filled with men spending what little they earned before returning to the darkness below ground. Thaddeus pushed through the batwing doors, his spurs jingling softly as he approached the bar. "Whiskey," he said to the barkeep, sliding a coin across the scarred wood. "And information, if you're selling that too." The barkeep, a man with more hair sprouting from his ears than his head, poured the amber liquid with practiced efficiency. "Depends on what kind of information you're looking for, stranger. Those women working at Blackrock, heard they weren't there by choice." The barkeep's eyes darted nervously to a table in the corner where 3 men in better clothes than the miners played cards. "Don't know nothing about that. Mine foreman over there might, though he don't take kindly to questions." Thaddeus nodded, taking his whiskey to an empty table with a view of both the door and the card players. He sipped slowly, watching and waiting as the saloon filled with the evening crowd. Stories and rumors floated around him of the mine owner, Jeremiah Blackrock, and his operation that was as profitable as it was brutal. An hour later, a young man with haunted eyes slid into the chair across from Thaddeus. "Heard you asking about the women," he whispered, his fingers trembling slightly on the table. "My sister's one of them, Mabel. They told her she'd be cooking for the miners, paid our pa $50 and took her away 6 months ago." "How many guards?" Thaddeus asked quietly. 6, usually. Sometimes more when the gold shipment goes out." The young man, who introduced himself as Samuel, leaned closer. "They keep the women locked in a cabin at night, behind the main office." Thaddeus nodded, sliding a few coins across the table. "Get yourself something to eat, son. And stay away from the mine tomorrow." After Samuel left, Thaddeus observed the card game breaking up. The mine foreman, a bullish man with a waxed mustache and cold eyes, collected his winnings and headed for the door. Thaddeus followed at a distance, tracking him to a large house at the edge of town, a proper place for a man profiting from others' suffering. That night, Thaddeus made his plans beneath the stars, his bedroll spread on the hard ground outside of town. Morning would bring violence, he knew, but some wrongs couldn't be answered any other way. Dawn broke with the promise of a scorching day. Thaddeus approached the mine under the guise of seeking work, his rifle wrapped in a blanket and strapped to Duster's saddle. The guard at the entrance eyed him suspiciously, but directed him to the office when Thaddeus mentioned his experience with explosives. Inside the cramped office, the same foreman from the saloon looked up with irritation. "Another drifter looking for work. We're full up." "Heard you might need someone who knows how to handle dynamite properly," Thaddeus said calmly. "Last place I worked said I was the best they'd seen." The foreman, who introduced himself as Harkins, snorted. "And where was that silver mine up in Montana? Closed down after a cave-in." Thaddeus leaned against the wall, studying the layout visible through the window. "Bad business, that. Tunnel supports weren't set right." Harkins seemed to consider this. "We had a man blow his hand off last month. Might be we could use someone with experience." He stood, adjusting the gun belt at his waist. "Let me show you the operation." The tour was exactly what Thaddeus needed. He counted 8 guards, not the 6 Samuel had mentioned, noting their positions and routines. The women were scattered throughout the camp, performing various tasks under watchful eyes. Each looked thin and exhausted, their movements mechanical. One woman caught his attention immediately. She worked at the water pump, filling buckets that she carried to thirsty miners. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical knot, but strands had escaped to frame a face that, despite its pallor and exhaustion, held striking beauty and defiance. When she turned, her eyes met his briefly deep brown and burning with an inner fire that hardship hadn't extinguished. "That's Mary," Harkins said, following his gaze. "Feisty one, had to break her spirit a few times." He chuckled. "The men like looking at her, though." Thaddeus felt his hand twitch toward his gun but forced himself to remain calm. "How many women you got working here?" "5. Good investment, each one. Cost me less than a mule and work twice as hard." Harkins spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. "Bought them legal from families that couldn't feed them or husbands that got tired of them. Got papers and everything." "Smart business," Thaddeus said, fighting to keep the disgust from his voice. By midday, he'd seen enough. He agreed to start work the following morning, then rode back to town to make his final preparations. At the general store, he purchased ammunition, supplies, and a small box of dynamite sticks that the storekeeper kept hidden beneath the counter for trusted customers. "Planning some mining of your own?" the storekeeper asked, wrapping the dangerous sticks in cloth. "Something like that," Thaddeus replied. That night, he returned to the mine under the cover of darkness. Moving silently through the scrub brush, he positioned himself on the ridge overlooking the camp. Most of the operation was quiet now, with only a skeleton crew of guards patrolling the grounds. A light burned in the cabin where the women were locked for the night, and occasionally a shadow would pass the single window. Thaddeus waited patiently until the moon was high. When the guard nearest the cabin took his regular break to smoke, leaving his post unmanned for precious minutes, Thaddeus made his move. He slipped down to the edge of the camp, sticking to the shadows. The first guard never saw him coming. Thaddeus clamped a hand over the man's mouth and struck him hard on the temple with the butt of his pistol, lowering the unconscious body silently to the ground. Taking the guard's keys, he moved toward the cabin. A second guard appeared around the corner, and Thaddeus had to act quickly. He lunged forward, tackling the man and driving his fist into his throat to silence any alarm. After a brief struggle, this guard too lay unconscious. At the cabin door, Thaddeus paused, listening. He could hear soft voices inside, women talking in hushed tones. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. 5 pairs of eyes turned to him, wide with fear that quickly changed to confusion when they saw he wasn't one of their usual captors. "I'm here to get you out," he said simply. "All of you. But we need to move fast and quiet." The woman he recognized as Mary stood, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Who are you?" "Name's Thaddeus Tucker. Someone in town mentioned what was happening here. Couldn't let it stand." He glanced out the window, checking for approaching guards. "We don't have time for explanations now." "Why should we trust you?" asked another woman, this one younger with honey blonde hair and a Scottish accent. "How do we know this isn't some kind of test?" Thaddeus removed his gun belt and offered it to Mary. "Here, you can shoot me if I'm lying. But right now, we need to move before those guards wake up or someone notices they're missing." Mary took the belt, her fingers brushing his. She didn't put it on but held the pistol with surprising confidence. "Ladies, I think this might be our only chance. I say we take it." The others nodded, though fear was evident on their faces. "I'm Abigail," said the Scottish woman. She pointed to the others in turn. "That's Alina, she's from back east. Sarah's from a farm in Kansas. And that's Rebecca, she was a school teacher." Mary stepped forward. "I'm Mary Lawson. And if you're truly helping us escape, then I owe you a debt I can never repay." "Save the thanks for when we're safely away from here," Thaddeus said. "Now follow me and stay close." Leading the women out into the night, Thaddeus moved cautiously through the camp. They had almost reached the edge when a shout rang out, followed by the blast of a shotgun. Buckshot peppered the ground near their feet. "Run!" Thaddeus yelled, turning to face the threat. 3 guards were running toward them, weapons drawn. Mary, still holding his pistol, raised it and fired. Her shot went wide, but it was enough to make the guards dive for cover. Thaddeus grabbed the dynamite from his satchel, lit the fuse with a match struck against his boot, and hurled it toward the mining equipment. The explosion rocked the night, sending flames and debris skyward. In the chaos, they fled into the darkness, running until their lungs burned. A mile from the mine, Thaddeus had tethered 5 horses stolen earlier from the mine's corral. "Can all of you ride?" he asked. The women nodded, though Sarah and Rebecca looked uncertain. "Just hold on tight," Mary told them. "Freedom's worth a sore backside." They rode through the night, pushing the horses as hard as they dared, taking turns on trails to obscure their tracks. By dawn, they had covered nearly 30 miles, finally stopping at a small creek to rest the horses and themselves. "Where are you taking us?" Alina asked, splashing cold water on her face. Her refined accent suggested an educated background that made her presence at the mine even more perplexing. "I have a place," Thaddeus said. "About 2 days' ride from here. Land I bought years ago but never settled. It's remote, defensible. You'll be safe there until you decide what you want to do next." Mary studied him, her initial suspicion giving way to cautious gratitude. "Why did you do this? Why risk your life for strangers?" Thaddeus looked away, uncomfortable with her direct gaze. "Some things a man can't abide seeing. What they were doing to you all, it wasn't right." "No, it wasn't," Mary agreed softly. "But most men would have looked the other way." "I'm not most men," he said simply. They rested for an hour before continuing, keeping to less traveled paths and avoiding the few settlements they passed. By nightfall, exhaustion had set in, and Thaddeus found a sheltered hollow where they could make camp. As the women gathered wood for a small fire, Thaddeus noticed Mary wincing as she moved. "You're hurt," he said. She shook her head dismissively. "It's nothing, just some bruises from the last time I disrespected Harkins." Anger flared in Thaddeus's chest. "Let me see." After a moment's hesitation, Mary turned, lifting the edge of her tattered shirt to reveal a pattern of ugly bruises across her lower back. "They'll heal," she said. "They always do." Thaddeus reached into his saddlebag for a small tin of salve. "This will help with the pain. My mother used to make it." Their eyes met as he handed her the tin, and something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the first fragile thread of trust. That night, as the women slept huddled together for warmth, Thaddeus kept watch, his rifle across his knees. He had no illusions about the danger they were in. Blackrock wouldn't let valuable property go without a fight. There would be pursuit, perhaps bounty hunters. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. But looking at the sleeping women, seeing the peace on their faces, perhaps the first real rest they'd had in months, he knew he'd made the right choice. Dawn broke clear and cool. Thaddeus was already awake, having dozed fitfully between watches. Mary stirred first, moving stiffly to the creek to wash her face. When she returned, she sat beside him, accepting the strip of dried beef he offered. "How long were you at the mine?" he asked quietly, not wanting to wake the others yet. 8 months, she replied. "My husband died of fever last year. I took work as a housekeeper for a family in Denver, but the master of the house had inappropriate intentions." Her voice hardened. "When I refused him, he sold me to Blackrock to teach me my place." Thaddeus's jaw tightened. No one has the right to sell another human being. "The law might disagree, at least when it comes to women and colored folks," Mary said bitterly. "Blackrock had papers, said I owed a debt for my lodging and food that I had to work off. That's not a debt. That's slavery by another name." Mary looked at him with surprise, as though unused to hearing such sentiments from a man. "The others have similar stories. Eleanor's husband gambled her away in a card game. Sarah's father sold her for $50 and a horse. Rebecca was tricked with the promise of a teaching position. And Abigail was told she'd be working in a respectable hotel. And none of you could leave. Try and you'd be beaten. Try again and you might not live to try a third time." Mary's hand unconsciously touched her bruised side. "2 women did try to escape before I arrived. They didn't succeed." The others began to stir, and the conversation ended as they prepared to continue their journey. The day's ride was grueling, the terrain growing more rugged as they headed into the foothills. By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. "Storm coming," Thaddeus observed. "We need to find shelter." They pushed on until they found an abandoned trapper's cabin tucked into a stand of pines. The roof leaked in places, but it was dry enough, and the stone fireplace was intact. While Thaddeus gathered firewood, the women cleaned the cabin as best they could, sweeping out debris and making pallets from pine boughs. The storm broke just as they settled inside, rain hammering the roof and wind howling through the cracks in the walls. Thunder crashed, making Sarah jump and Eleanor place a comforting arm around her shoulders. "How much further to this land of yours?" Abigail asked, warming her hands by the small fire. "Should reach it by tomorrow afternoon if the weather clears," Thaddeus replied. "And then what?" Rebecca spoke up for the first time since their escape. "What happens to us then?" Thaddeus hadn't thought that far ahead. "The land's good water, timber, some cleared fields. It's yours if you want it. I can help you build proper shelters, get you established." "And what do you get out of this arrangement?" Eleanor asked, her voice carrying the edge of someone who had learned to be wary of men's motives. "Nothing," Thaddeus said. "I bought the land years ago, thinking I might settle down someday. Never did. Better it be used than sit empty." The women exchanged glances, clearly uncertain whether to believe such generosity came without strings attached. Mary broke the silence. "We're grateful, Mr. Tucker, truly. But you must understand our caution. Men haven't given us much reason to trust their intentions." "I understand," he said. "And it's just Thaddeus. Mr. Tucker was my father." The storm continued through the night, but by morning had blown itself out, leaving the world washed clean. They set out early, Thaddeus now riding beside Mary while the others followed in a line. "Tell me about this land," Mary said after they had ridden in silence for some time. "It's in a valley, about 30 acres. Stream runs through it year-round. Good soil in the bottomland. Previous owner had an orchard started apples, I think. There's a cabin, though it likely needs work after sitting empty so long." "Sounds like paradise after the mine," Mary said. Thaddeus glanced at her, noting how the sunlight caught in her dark hair, bringing out hints of auburn. Even trail-worn and exhausted, there was a quiet dignity about her that he admired. "It's nothing fancy," he warned, "and it'll be hard work making it livable for all of you." "Mr. Tucker, Thaddeus," Mary corrected herself, "we're no strangers to hard work, but to work for ourselves, to keep the fruits of our labor." She smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. That would be worth any amount of effort. They crested a ridge in the late afternoon, and Thaddeus reined in his horse. Below them lay a small valley, cradled by forested hills. A stream wound through its center, reflecting the sun's rays like a ribbon of gold. Fields, overgrown but still visible, spread out on either side, and at the far end stood a cabin, weathered but sound. "It's beautiful," Sarah breathed. "It's yours now," Thaddeus said. They rode down into the valley, the women's exhaustion momentarily forgotten in their excitement. The cabin was, as Thaddeus remembered, a simple 2-room structure with a stone fireplace and a covered porch. The door hung askew on its hinges, and inside, mice had made nests in the corners, but the roof was intact and the walls solid. "We'll clean it up in no time," Abigail said with determined optimism. While the women explored the cabin, Thaddeus unsaddled the horses and turned them into a small corral that would need mending but would serve for now. He was checking the well when Mary joined him. "The others are already planning where to plant a garden," she said, amusement in her voice. "Eleanor apparently comes from farming folk, despite her fancy accent. Good. The growing season's short up here, but there's still time to get some things in the ground." Thaddeus let the bucket drop into the well, hearing the satisfying splash as it hit water. "Will you stay?" Mary asked suddenly. "To help us get established, I mean." Thaddeus hauled up the bucket, considering his answer. "For a while. There's much to do: repairs to the cabin, building new shelters, getting in firewood for winter. I can't leave you ladies to face that alone." Relief crossed Mary's face. "We're capable, but I won't pretend we couldn't use the help." The first weeks at the valley were backbreaking work. Thaddeus showed the women how to fell trees, strip bark, and notch logs for cabin building. Mary proved particularly adept, her determination making up for what she lacked in physical strength. Together, they built a second cabin, smaller than the first but sturdy, with a stone fireplace and plank flooring. Thaddeus milled himself from pine logs. Eleanor and Sarah took to farming with surprising enthusiasm, clearing weeds from the old fields and planting vegetables from seeds Thaddeus purchased on a trip to Riverside. Abigail, who had worked as a seamstress before being sold to the mine, began making proper clothes from fabric purchased on the same trip, transforming the women's appearance and spirits. Rebecca, the former schoolteacher, organized their limited supplies with methodical precision and began keeping a journal of their new life. Her quiet competence complemented Abigail's cheerful energy, Sarah's gentle nature, and Eleanor's practical knowledge, and Mary. Mary became the heart of their small community. She worked from dawn until dusk, never complaining despite the blisters on her hands and the ache in her muscles. At night, around the fire, she would sometimes sing songs from her childhood in Missouri, her voice clear and true in the darkness. Thaddeus found himself watching her more and more, admiring not just her beauty but her resilience, her kindness toward the others, her fierce determination. And sometimes, when she didn't know he was looking, he caught her watching him too. A month after their arrival, Thaddeus was repairing the roof of the main cabin when he spotted riders approaching 3 men, moving with purpose. He scrambled down the ladder, grabbing his rifle from where it leaned against the wall. "Mary," he called, "get the others inside. We have company." Mary herded the women into the cabin while Thaddeus took position behind a woodpile, his rifle trained on the approaching riders. As they drew closer, he recognized the lead man, Harkins, the mine foreman, his mustache unmistakable even at a distance. "Stay inside, no matter what happens," Thaddeus instructed the women. "There's a loaded shotgun under the bed if you need it." He stepped out into the clearing as the riders approached, his rifle held ready but not aimed. "That's far enough," he called when they were within earshot. Harkins reined in his horse, the other men bounty hunters by the look of them flanking him. "Well, if it ain't the thief himself," Harkins sneered. "You stole property belonging to Mr. Blackrock, and we've come to collect." "Those women aren't property," Thaddeus said calmly. "They're free citizens, and they're under my protection now." "Got papers that say different." Harkins patted his breast pocket. "Sheriff in Riverside's already seen them. Says I have every right to reclaim what's mine." "Then you've wasted a long ride," Thaddeus replied. "Because they're not leaving here except by their own choice." One of the bounty hunters, a weasel-faced man with a missing front tooth, spat on the ground. "1 man against 3. Them ain't good odds, mister." "I've faced worse," Thaddeus said, his voice deadly quiet. The tension stretched between them, a bowstring pulled too tight. Then the cabin door opened, and Mary stepped out, the shotgun in her hands. She was followed by the other women, each armed: Rebecca with an axe, Alina with a pitchfork, Sarah with a skinning knife, and Abigail with a cast-iron skillet that would crack a skull if swung with enough force. "As you can see," Mary said, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands, "Mr. Tucker isn't alone." Harkins's face darkened with rage. "You ungrateful bitches. After all the food and shelter I provided, Alina cut in, her voice sharp with anger. "You worked us from dawn till dusk, fed us scraps, and let your men treat us like animals. We owe you nothing." "The law says different," Harkins insisted. "Then perhaps the law should hear about the 2 women who tried to escape," Mary said, taking a step forward. The shotgun never wavered in her hands. "The ones buried behind the mine office. I wonder what the real sheriff, not whatever drunk you paid off in Riverside, would make of that." Uncertainty flickered across Harkins's face. "You're bluffing. You can't prove anything." "Maybe not," Thaddeus agreed. "But rumors have a way of spreading. Mining company might not appreciate that kind of attention, might start asking questions about other aspects of your operation." He lowered his voice. "Like where some of that gold goes before it's reported." The implication hung in the air. Harkins's eyes narrowed, calculating. Finally, he spat on the ground. "They ain't worth the trouble, plenty more where they came from." He jerked his head at his companions. "Let's go." As they turned their horses, Harkins looked back at Thaddeus. "This ain't over, Tucker. You made an enemy today." "Wouldn't be the first time," Thaddeus replied evenly. They watched in tense silence as the riders disappeared over the ridge. Only when they were well out of sight did Mary lower the shotgun, her hands finally beginning to shake in earnest. "Will they come back?" Sarah asked fearfully. "Maybe," Thaddeus admitted. "But not today, and we'll be ready if they do." That night they ate dinner in subdued silence, the confrontation having shaken their newfound sense of security. After the meal, Thaddeus stepped outside to check on the horses, and Mary followed him. "Thank you," she said quietly, for standing with us." "Seemed like you ladies were standing just fine on your own," he replied with a small smile. "Remind me never to cross Abigail when she's holding that skillet." Mary laughed, the sound soft in the gathering darkness. "Still, we're grateful. Not just for today, but for everything." She hesitated, then added, "I'm grateful." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an unspoken understanding that had been growing since that first night of their escape. Thaddeus took a step toward her, drawn by a force he couldn't name. "Mary." A crash from inside the cabin interrupted whatever he had been about to say. They rushed back inside to find that one of the shelves Rebecca had been building had collapsed, sending dishes clattering to the floor. The moment, whatever it might have been, was lost in the cleanup and laughter that followed. But that night, as Thaddeus lay on his bedroll on the porch, having insisted the women take both cabins, he found himself thinking of Mary, her courage, her laugh, the way the firelight caught in her hair. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a future that wasn't solitary. The next morning, Thaddeus announced his plan to ride to the nearest large town, a 3-day journey to file legal homesteading papers for the women, and to speak with a proper sheriff about the situation at Blackrock Mine. Though the women protested being left alone after yesterday's confrontation, they knew the importance of securing their legal right to the land. "I'll be back in a week," he promised. "Keep the rifle loaded and stay alert." Mary walked with him to where Duster was saddled and waiting. "Be careful," she said. "Harkins and Blackrock have money and influence." "And I have the truth," Thaddeus replied. "Sometimes that's enough." On impulse, Mary stood on tiptoe and kissed his cheek. "For luck," she whispered, then turned and walked quickly back to the cabin, leaving Thaddeus touching his face in wonder. The journey to Fort Collins was uneventful, the late summer weather holding fair. Thaddeus spent the nights under the stars, thinking of the valley and the women who were making it their home. Of Mary, with her quiet strength and surprising moments of joy. In Fort Collins, he found the land office and filed homestead claims for each of the women, using money he'd saved from odd jobs over the years to pay the fees. The clerk raised an eyebrow at 5 single women claiming adjacent parcels, but recorded the transactions without comment. His next stop was the sheriff's office, where he recounted what he knew of Blackrock Mine's operations, including the allegations of forced labor and murder. Sheriff Thomas Mills was a grizzled veteran of both the war and the frontier, not easily shocked or swayed. "Serious accusations," Mills said, leaning back in his chair. "You got any proof?" "The women themselves," Thaddeus replied. "And if you were to investigate, I suspect you'd find those graves Mary mentioned." Mills stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Blackrock's got friends in high places. Politicians, judges, makes going after him complicated. And if those politicians knew he was skimming gold," Thaddeus suggested, "cheating his investors and the government out of their share," this caught Mills's interest. "Now that's something I could get traction on. Treasury Department takes a dim view of that kind of thing." He nodded decisively. "I'll look into it. Can't promise anything, but I won't ignore it either." Satisfied with this small victory, Thaddeus gathered supplies for the return journey: seeds, tools, fabric, and other necessities the women had requested. He purchased a used wagon to transport everything, along with 5 milk goats that would provide both dairy and breeding stock for their growing homestead. The return journey took longer with the wagon and livestock, but Thaddeus pushed on, eager to return to the valley. To Mary. He found himself imagining her reaction to the goats, to the bolts of bright fabric he'd selected, to the books he'd found for Rebecca. When he finally crested the ridge overlooking the valley, he stopped in surprise. Below, the homestead had been transformed. New fencing enclosed an expanded garden area. A third small cabin was under construction. Smoke rose cheerfully from both existing chimneys, and clothes flapped on a washing line strung between trees. And there was Mary, walking from the stream with a bucket of water, her face tilted up to catch the sun. Even from a distance, he could see she moved more easily now, her body healing from the abuses of the mine, her spirit visibly lighter. Thaddeus urged the wagon forward, and soon the women spotted him. They came running, exclaiming over the wagon, the supplies, and especially the goats, which a leaner immediately claimed expertise in handling. But it was Mary's welcome that warmed him most, her smile, genuine and unguarded, and the way her hand briefly clasped his as she helped him down from the wagon. "Welcome home," she said, and for the first time in his wandering life, Thaddeus truly felt he had come home. That evening, after unloading the supplies and settling the goats in their hastily constructed pen, they celebrated with a feast of venison stew. Sarah had proved surprisingly adept with a rifle and fresh bread. Thaddeus shared the news from Fort Collins. The homestead papers were filed, and the sheriff had promised to investigate Blackrock. "Will that be enough to keep us safe?" Rebecca asked. "It's a start," Thaddeus replied. "And Blackrock has more to lose than we do if the law starts looking too closely at his operation." As the evening wore on, the women drifted off to their respective beds, tired from the day's excitement. Mary lingered, helping Thaddeus clean up the remains of their meal. "Thank you for the fabric," she said, her fingers trailing over a bolt of deep blue cotton. "It's been so long since I had anything pretty." "It suits you," he said. "The color, I mean." Their eyes met across the table, and the air between them seemed to thicken. Thaddeus cleared his throat, suddenly nervous in a way gunfights and confrontations had never made him. "Mary, I've been thinking. This place," he gestured to encompass the cabin, the valley beyond. "It's becoming something special. You ladies have worked wonders." "We've had help," she said softly. "Still, He hesitated, then plunged ahead. "I'm not good with words, never have been, but I'd like to stay, to keep helping, to see what this place could become." Mary's smile was like sunrise. "I'd like that too, Thaddeus, very much." It wasn't a declaration of love, not yet, but it was a beginning, a promise of possibilities. And for two people who had seen too much of the world's darkness, it was enough for now. The weeks turned into months, and the valley homestead flourished under their combined efforts. The third cabin was completed before the first snow fell, giving all 5 women private space while still maintaining their close community. Thaddeus built his own small cabin a respectful distance away, though he took most meals with the women and spent his days working alongside them. Winter in the Colorado foothills was harsh but beautiful. Snow blanketed the valley in pristine white, and on clear days, the sky was a blue so intense it almost hurt to look at. The women proved as resilient against the cold as they had against their previous hardships, keeping fires burning, spinning wool from the sheep Thaddeus had added to their livestock, and turning the long evenings into times of storytelling and music. Christmas brought a special celebration. They decorated the main cabin with pine boughs and berries, and each person made simple gifts for the others: knitted scarves, carved wooden spoons, preserved fruits from their summer harvest. Thaddeus surprised them all with a fiddle he'd purchased on a supply run to Riverside. And that night, they danced in the crowded cabin, laughing as they bumped into furniture and each other. When it came time for Mary to dance, she hesitated only briefly before accepting Thaddeus's outstretched hand. They moved together awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence as a leaner played a lilting tune. The others watched with knowing smiles, for the connection between Mary and Thaddeus had become increasingly obvious to everyone except perhaps themselves. After the dance, they stepped outside for a moment of quiet beneath the star-strewn sky. Their breath fogged in the cold air, and Mary shivered slightly. "Here," Thaddeus said, removing his coat and placing it around her shoulders. "You'll freeze," she protested, but made no move to return it. "I've weathered colder with less," he assured her. They stood in companionable silence, looking up at the stars. The sounds of music and laughter drifted from the cabin, but here it felt as though they were alone in the world. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," Mary said suddenly. "Safe. Happy." Thaddeus looked down at her, her face illuminated by starlight and the glow from the cabin windows. "You deserve all that and more, Mary." "So do you," she said, meeting his gaze. "You've given so much to all of us, asked for nothing in return." "That's not entirely true," he admitted. "I've come to care for this place, for the life we're building here." He took a deep breath. "For you," Mary's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't look away. "Thaddeus." Whatever she might have said was lost as the cabin door opened and Abigail called out, "Mary, Thaddeus. Come back inside before you catch your death. Eleanor's going to teach us a Scottish reel." The moment broken, they returned to the warmth and light of the cabin. But something had changed between them. A door opened that could not be closed again. Spring came to the valley in a rush of melting snow and sudden greenery. The streams swelled with runoff, and the first wildflowers poked through the soil in a riot of color. With the warmer weather came new projects expanding the garden, repairing winter damage, preparing fields for planting. One sunny afternoon, Thaddeus was mending the goat pen when Mary approached, carrying a basket of freshly gathered eggs. "Walk with me," she asked, nodding toward the apple orchard that was just beginning to bud. They strolled together through the gnarled trees, pointing out signs of new growth, discussing plans for the coming growing season. A comfortable ease had developed between them over the winter months, yet beneath it ran a current of something deeper, something neither had fully acknowledged. "I've been thinking," Mary said as they reached the far end of the orchard where the land sloped up toward the forested hills, "about the future." "Oh," Thaddeus tried to sound casual, though his heart had begun to beat faster. "Yes, the others have been talking too." She set her basket down on a fallen log. "Eleanor and Sarah have decided to combine their homestead claims. They want to focus on raising sheep and goats, maybe start selling wool and cheese when we can get to market regularly." "That's a good plan," Thaddeus agreed. "They have a knack for it." "Rebecca wants to start a school eventually, not just for us, but for any children in the area. She says education is the key to a better life." "She's right about that." "And Abigail is talking about setting up a proper workshop for sewing and weaving. She thinks she could sell her work in Riverside or even Fort Collins." Thaddeus nodded, wondering where this conversation was leading. "And what about you, Mary? What do you want for your future?" Mary looked up at him, her eyes clear and direct. "That depends on you, Thaddeus." His breath caught. "On me?" "Yes." She took a step closer. "Because what I've come to want very much is a future with you in it, not just as our protector or our friend, but as—" She faltered, then continued with determination, "as my husband, if you'll have me." For a moment, Thaddeus could only stare, certain he had misheard, but Mary's expression was earnest, hopeful, and just a little frightened. "Mary," he finally managed, his voice rough with emotion, "are you asking me to marry you?" A flush crept up her cheeks, but she didn't look away. "I suppose I am. The others thought I should wait for you to ask, but I've never been patient when I know what I want." Thaddeus laughed, a sound of pure joy. In 2 strides, he closed the distance between them and took her hands in his. "Mary Lawson, I've been trying to find the courage to ask you the same question for months. Yes, I'll marry you. Nothing would make me happier." Her smile was radiant as she rose on tiptoe to press her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as Thaddeus wrapped his arms around her, drawing her close as if he would never let go. When they finally parted, both breathless, Mary rested her head against his chest. "The others will be insufferably pleased with themselves. They've been plotting this for weeks." "Have they now?" Thaddeus chuckled. "And here I thought I was being subtle." "About as subtle as a stampeding buffalo," Mary teased. Then, more seriously, "Are you sure, Thaddeus? I'm a widow with nothing to my name but a homestead claim and memories I'd rather forget. And I'm a drifter who never stayed in one place long enough to call it home until I met you," he replied. "We match, Mary. Two people who have seen the worst of life and still found a way to hope for better." They walked back to the cabins hand in hand, both unable to stop smiling. As they approached, the other women emerged, clearly having been watching for their return. "Well," Elinor demanded, hands on hips. Mary looked at Thaddeus, her eyes dancing with mischief. "Well, what?" "Don't you dare tease us, Mary Lawson," Abigail exclaimed. "Did you ask him or not?" "I did," Mary admitted, "and he said yes." Cheers erupted as the women surrounded them, offering congratulations and hugs. Sarah wiped happy tears from her eyes, while Rebecca immediately began discussing practical matters like where they would live and when the ceremony should be held. That evening, as they celebrated around the fire, Thaddeus found himself looking around at the life he had never expected to have: friends who had become family, a home built with his own hands, and Mary beside him, her fingers entwined with his. "Happy?" she asked quietly, noticing his thoughtful expression. "More than I ever thought possible," he replied honestly. Their wedding took place 2 weeks later on a perfect spring day. Rebecca, who had once been married by a circuit riding preacher, performed a simple ceremony in the meadow beside the stream. Elinor and Sarah had decorated the area with wildflowers, while Abigail had worked tirelessly to create a dress for Mary from the blue fabric Thaddeus had brought from Fort Collins. Mary was breathtaking as she walked toward him, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, crowned with a circlet of daisies. Thaddeus, wearing his one good shirt, freshly washed and pressed, felt his heart might burst with love and pride. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises to cherish and protect, to stand together through all life's joys and sorrows. When Rebecca pronounced them husband and wife, Thaddeus kissed his bride to the cheers and applause of their friends. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with food they had all contributed to prepare and music from Thaddeus's fiddle, passed among those who could play. As darkness fell, lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the scene. Finally, amidst knowing smiles and good-natured teasing, Mary and Thaddeus retired to his cabin, which the women had secretly prepared, cleaning it thoroughly and decorating it with fresh flowers and new curtains sewn by Abigail. Alone at last, they stood looking at each other in the soft light of a single lamp, suddenly shy despite the months of growing closeness. "Well, Mrs. Tucker," Thaddeus said softly, "welcome home." Mary's smile was luminous as she stepped into his embrace. "I've been home since the day you brought us to this valley, Thaddeus. I just didn't realize it until now." Their life together settled into a rhythm as natural as the seasons. The valley homestead, which they had begun calling sanctuary, after Rebecca used the word to describe how it felt to live there, continued to prosper. Word of their successful community spread, and occasionally other women seeking refuge would find their way to them. Some stayed only long enough to heal and gather strength before moving on to other places or reuniting with family. Others remained, building their own cabins on unclaimed land nearby, expanding the community. A few men came, 2 honest workers attracted by the growing settlement, or brothers and fathers of the women who had found shelter there. Thaddeus and Mary's cabin became the heart of sanctuary. They added rooms as their family grew, first with the birth of their son, Thomas, a year after their wedding, and then twin daughters, Sarah and Elizabeth, 2 years later. Mary proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving, while Thaddeus discovered a talent for storytelling that kept the children enthralled. The threat from Blackrock eventually faded. Sheriff Mills had indeed investigated the mine and found evidence of both fraud and mistreatment. While Blackrock himself had enough money and influence to escape serious consequences, the mine was forced to implement reforms and pay proper wages to its workers. Harkins was not so fortunate, facing charges for his role in the deaths of the 2 women Mary had mentioned. 5 years after their escape from the mine, the community gathered to celebrate the anniversary of their freedom. Tables laden with food stretched across the central green that had once been just a clearing between cabins. Children played underfoot while adults caught up on news and gossip. Mary found Thaddeus sitting somewhat apart, watching the festivities with a contented smile. Their youngest, 1-year-old James, slept against his chest, tiny fingers curled around his father's thumb. "What are you thinking about, looking so serious?" Mary asked, settling beside him on the bench. "How much has changed," he replied. "How much you've all accomplished." Mary followed his gaze to where Alina and Sarah were demonstrating cheese-making to some newcomers, then to Rebecca's schoolhouse, where older children were putting on a play for parents and siblings. Abigail, now married to a gentle blacksmith who had settled nearby, was showing off her latest quilt designs. "We couldn't have done it without you," Mary said, leaning against his shoulder. "I disagree," Thaddeus replied. "You all had the strength inside you. You just needed the chance to use it." "Perhaps," Mary conceded. "But you gave us that chance, Thaddeus. You saw our value when others saw only profit." He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of lavender she wore in her hair. "Best decision I ever made." From across the green, Alina called out, "Mary, Thaddeus." "The music's starting. Go on," Thaddeus urged when Mary hesitated, glancing at their sleeping son. "I'll stay with little James. You deserve to enjoy the celebration." "Only if you promise to dance with me later," Mary said, rising. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," he promised. As Mary walked toward the gathering, Thaddeus watched her go, still sometimes amazed that this remarkable woman had chosen him, had built a life with him. Looking around at the thriving community, they had created together, women and men living in mutual respect, children growing up free and loved. A true sanctuary in an often harsh world. He felt a sense of purpose and belonging he had never known in his wandering years. Little James stirred against his chest, blinking sleepily up at his father. Thaddeus smiled down at his son, this newest symbol of the future they were building. "Your mama is something special," he told the baby. "She taught me that sometimes the bravest thing isn't facing down guns or danger. Sometimes it's opening your heart, making a home, believing in better days ahead." James cooed in response, reaching up to pat his father's weathered cheek with a tiny hand. Later, as promised, Thaddeus danced with Mary beneath the stars, their children watching with delight as their parents twirled across the grass. The fiddle music soared into the night, carrying with it the joy of people who had found not just freedom, but true happiness. "I love you, Thaddeus Tucker," Mary whispered as the dance brought them close. "And I love you, Mary Tucker," he replied, "until the end of my days and beyond." Around them, sanctuary thrived, a testament to courage, determination, and the transformative power of love. What had begun as a desperate escape had become a legacy that would endure for generations, a place where the wounded could heal, the lost could find direction, and every person's worth was honored. As the music ended, Thaddeus held Mary close, both of them gazing up at the vast Colorado sky. The same stars that had witnessed their first meeting now shone down on the life. They had built together a life neither could have imagined in their darkest days, yet one that seemed, in this moment of perfect contentment, to have been waiting for them all along.